It's impossible to get a new technology that you've developed or new idea that you've developed to add substantial value unless we understand what are the conditions that are needed for any technology or any idea to bring value. What are these conditions? There are two conditions. The first one, a technology can bring value if and only if it can diminish a limitation. So if you want to make sure that your technology or idea can bring value, go and check what limitation does it diminish for the user. It's not what problem it solves, it's what limitation it diminishes for that user. That's a way of ensuring that a technology can bring value. But that, as per the message that Dr. Ellie Goldratt gave, is necessary but not sufficient to bring value. The fact that the technology can diminish a limitation, can allow it to bring value, it doesn't mean it will. What will ensure it will? Well, he reminded us that before the technology existed, we developed some kind of coping mechanism to live without that technology. So we developed some rules to live without the technology, with that limitation. And unless we change those old rules that acknowledge the limitation, it would be as if the limitation still exists. I want to give two quick examples of this. So think about your business invests in this powerful new IT system called the Enterprise Resource Planning System. And you ask, well, what's the limitation that this technology can diminish? Well, one of the most severe limitations in any business is not having access to all the data when you have to make decisions. So if this technology can somehow help us to overcome that limitation by always making sure the right data is available to make a decision, it could bring tremendous value. But you have to ask yourself, how did we live with the limitation before? We must have developed some coping mechanisms, some rules to live with that limitation. Think about a practical example like budgeting. Why do we do budgeting once a year? Because in the old days, it simply took so long to gather all the data that we couldn't afford to do it more than once a year. With today's IT systems, we could have access every day to all the data that we need to make decisions about how best to allocate resources. And yet, we never changed the rule that acknowledged that previous limitation. We still do budgeting once a year. And then we are surprised that we didn't get value from our IT system. I want to bring another example quite close to my heart. We have done a lot of work with an institute that is dealing with children with autism. And what has been fascinating about this to see how this same principle also applies to behavioral therapy. So think about this. A child might be suffering severe forms of traumatic experiences. It's the kind of things that a typical 2-year-old, they will get upset, they will start screaming or make some kind of behavior. So this child will go through therapy and they will hopefully get the right therapy to dramatically reduce these type of tantrums, for example. But how did the parents previously live with this issue, with this limitation? They might have practically decided not to take the child with them to restaurants or movies because of the fear of having such an event, to try not just to protect the child, but in some form also to protect themselves from being embarrassed. Now the question is, if these behavioral therapy sessions really work, it's dramatically reducing the incidence, but they never changed the old rule of not taking this child with them out to the movies, out to restaurants. For that child, it would be as if that limitation still exists. So that's how we can make the impossible possible, how we can ensure that great technologies, great ideas can unlock tremendous value by being very clear, number one, what is the limitation it can help us diminish? But secondly, to think about what was the rule that allowed us to live with that limitation, which unless we change, it would be as if that limitation still exists. That's how we make the impossible possible.